The mysterious arrival, 5 to 7 minute hook. The Galactic Council was silent. The Great Chamber, located in the heart of the galaxy, was a place where the most powerful beings in the universe came together to discuss the fate of the stars. The representatives of hundreds of species sat around a massive circular table, their eyes trained on a holographic display. The tension in the air was palpable. They were discussing an enemy unlike any other they had faced before, an unstoppable force that had started to sweep across the galaxy. The enemy was ruthless, merciless, and seemed to leave nothing but destruction in their wake. The Galactic Council had been unable to stop them. No fleet was powerful enough. No weapon was deadly enough. The galaxy was on the brink of collapse. What do we do? One of the council members, a tall, armored being from the planet Cylor, asked, his voice thick with concern. Our fleets have been shattered, and we've lost planets. If this continues, we will fall. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The leaders of various races, each of them seasoned in war and diplomacy, knew that they were facing a threat they couldn't overcome on their own. The thought of defeat was almost too much to bear. Perhaps it's time we accept the truth, said the representative from the Norexian Union, a species of ancient, intelligent beings. We cannot defeat them with the forces we have. We may need to ask for help. The room fell into stunned silence. Asking for help was unheard of. The Galactic Council, for all its power and influence, had never been in a position where it had to beg for assistance. To rely on others was seen as a weakness. But what choice did they have? The enemy was closing in, and every tactic they tried failed. It was as if nothing could stop them. Just as the council members began to murmur among themselves, a soft but unmistakable chime echoed through the room. It was a signal. Something was trying to communicate with them. The lights in the chamber flickered for a moment as the holographic display shifted. A new image appeared, one that sent a wave of shock through the council. The signal came from the farthest reaches of the galaxy, from a place where no one had ventured in centuries. The display revealed a dark, imposing fleet, ships unlike any the council had ever seen. They were massive, with jagged edges and weapons that hummed with an eerie energy. The fleet was moving at an incredible speed, cutting through space like a blade through paper. The voice that echoed through the chamber was deep and filled with power, sending chills down every spine in the room. We are the Deathworlders, the voice declared, its tone confident, almost challenging. Your galaxy is in danger, and we are the only ones who can save you. There was a long pause before the council members could react. The name of the fleet, Deathworlders, was not one they had expected to hear. The Deathworlders were a race of beings who lived on the most hostile, dangerous planets in the universe. No one knew much about them except that they were feared. Their reputation for destruction and brutality was legendary, and they had never shown any interest in the galaxy before. The council members exchanged nervous glances. They knew what the Deathworlders were capable of. Their worlds were so dangerous that even the strongest species could not survive there. The Deathworlders had built their civilizations on planets filled with the most terrifying creatures, violent storms, and deadly landscapes. To survive, they had to become even more dangerous than the worlds they lived on. Now, the Deathworlders were offering their help. What is the meaning of this? The Tylorian representative finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would they offer help now, after all this time? The voice on the screen chuckled darkly. The time has come. Your enemy is a threat to us as well. We cannot let them destroy everything we fought to protect. Another voice, this time from the Norexian representative, spoke up, trembling with unease. We have heard of your methods, your tactics. You are known for your extreme violence. Can we trust you? The Deathworlder fleet was silent for a moment before the deep voice responded. You don't have to trust us. You only need to trust the results. If you want your galaxy to survive, we will show you how to fight. And if you don't want to fight, we will do it for you. But beware, We will do it our way. The council members were frozen. There was no turning back now. The Deathworlders had given them an ultimatum. Their help came at a cost, and that cost was something none of them were prepared for. As the council sat in stunned silence, a new message flickered on the screen. This time, it was a visual, an image of a city burning. Alien ships fell from the sky, their weapons raining down fire upon everything below. A Deathworlder warship loomed over the chaos, its guns firing relentlessly. The council watched in horror as the video continued. There was no mercy, no hesitation. The Deathworlders had shown them what they were capable of. The message was clear. The Deathworlders would stop at nothing to defeat their enemies, no matter the cost. The decision was now in the hands of the Galactic Council. They could either accept the Deathworlders' offer and risk everything, or they could face certain destruction. As the Council deliberated, the fleet hovered on the edge of the galaxy, waiting for their answer. The fate of the universe now rested on a single choice. Would the Galactic Council risk trusting the Deathworlders, or would they face the end of everything they had built? The price of salvation. The Galactic Council chamber was filled with whispers. The news of the Deathworlders' arrival had sent shockwaves through the room. As the holographic display showed the image of a burning city, the members of the Council couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Their own fleets had been crushed, their defenses shattered, and their homeworlds at risk. The enemy they were facing was unstoppable. They needed help. But the question was, at what cost? The representatives sat in tense silence, each one weighing the offer before them. Would they accept help from a race known for its brutal methods? The Deathworlders were legends in the galaxy, but they were also feared for their ruthlessness. Their tactics were savage, their strategies brutal. Could they truly be trusted? "This is madness," muttered the Xylorian representative, his voice shaking with uncertainty. "To accept aid from the Deathworlders is to abandon everything we fought for. They will enslave us, control us, use our worlds as they see fit." "I disagree," said the Norexian representative, a longtime diplomat and strategist. "We've already lost our ability to fight. We have no other choice. Our only hope lies in their strength." Across the table, the Aldronian ambassador, a species known for their intellect, tapped his fingers against the surface of the council table. His eyes were filled with both fear and awe. "The Deathworlders don't negotiate. They don't ask for our trust. They demand it. And if we refuse, they'll leave us to fend for ourselves." The room fell quiet. The weight of the decision was heavy on everyone's shoulders. The images of destroyed cities, alien ships falling from the sky, and the cold, calculating voice of the Deathworlders haunted their minds. There was no denying the power they wielded. "I say we take the offer," the Aldronian ambassador continued. "But we must ensure that we have control. We can't let them dictate everything. We need a plan." A heated debate broke out among the council members, each one presenting arguments both for and against the Deathworlders' involvement. The tension was palpable, the future of the galaxy hanging in the balance. Then, just as the arguments seemed to reach a boiling point, a new message arrived from the Deathworlders. The holographic display shifted again, and the deep voice echoed throughout the chamber. "We await your decision," the voice said, its tone firm. "You've seen what we can do. We will not wait forever. If you choose to refuse our help, your fate will be sealed." The council members exchanged glances, their fear and pride battling within them. To trust the Deathworlders was to surrender control over their galaxy, but to refuse was to doom themselves to annihilation. It was then that the Norexian representative stood up, his face grim but determined. "I will make the motion. We accept the Deathworlders' offer, but I demand one thing. We must have a say in the strategy. We will fight alongside them, but we will not let them control our every move." The motion was seconded. There was no turning back now. The council had made their choice. Within moments, the Deathworlder fleet responded, their holographic commander appearing on the screen once more. "Your decision is noted. We will begin the assault immediately. Prepare your forces. You will see our methods firsthand." The chamber was filled with an eerie silence as the hologram flickered out. The council members looked at one another, their hearts heavy with the weight of the decision they had just made. They had chosen to fight alongside the Deathworlders, but they had also opened the door to an unknown future. They would face the full force of the Deathworlder war machine, their tactics, their strategies, and their deadly precision. There was no going back. As the meeting ended, the council members left the room with heavy hearts and minds full of questions. Would they survive the coming war? Would they be able to maintain any semblance of control over their fate? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. The shock of Deathworlder tactics. The first wave of Deathworlder forces arrived faster than anyone could have imagined. No one had expected the Deathworlders to act so quickly, but they wasted no time in showcasing their terrifying power. The Galactic Council had been briefed on the basics of Deathworlder combat, but nothing could have prepared them for the brutality of what they were about to witness. On the screen, the first reports came in. Planets in the enemy's path were being torn apart. Massive ships, once thought to be invincible, were reduced to floating wrecks within minutes. The Deathworlders' tactics were like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. There were no slow sieges, no drawn-out battles. The Deathworlders attacked with surgical precision, overwhelming their enemies before they even had time to react. "Impossible," the Aldronian ambassador whispered, his voice shaking as the images flashed across the screen. "This is madness. They're using biological weapons, cutting-edge energy weapons, and they're deploying ground forces within hours of each attack." They didn't even wait for a formal strike. A new message came through from the Deathworlder fleet. It was short and to the point. "We strike when we choose. The enemy is weak. Our methods are efficient. Proceed with caution." As the message ended, the room fell silent once again. The members of the Galactic Council were beginning to realize the true extent of what they had unleashed. These weren't just mercenaries. They were a force of nature, and their brutal efficiency was beyond anything the Council had ever dreamed of. Back at the front lines, Deathworlder war tactics were being put into play. The Council's fleets, who had been so proud of their fleets and tactics, quickly learned that their conventional strategies were useless against the Deathworlders. There was no room for negotiations, no chance for drawn-out dialogues. The Deathworlders didn't just win. They crushed any and all resistance in their path. On the battlefield, the Deathworlders' ground forces were even more terrifying. They used highly advanced combat drones alongside their own warriors, merging biological and technological warfare. They deployed heavy artillery from their ships and immediately launched devastating orbital strikes that wiped out entire enemy battalions in seconds. The enemy, once thought to be a formidable force, was left reeling, unable to adapt. The Council's representative on the battlefield was left speechless. He had never seen anything like this. His troops were overwhelmed by the sheer power and precision of the Deathworlders' tactics. For a moment, he felt a sense of dread. It was as though the Deathworlders were toying with them, showing just how outmatched they truly were. As the battles raged on, reports began pouring in. The Deathworlders' ships had destroyed entire fleets with ease, and on the ground, their warriors moved with terrifying coordination. The Galactic Council's forces, once the pride of the galaxy, were reduced to nothing but fleeing survivors. The Deathworlders had not only demonstrated their overwhelming power, but they had shown the galaxy just how fragile their position had been. But there was something even more terrifying than their physical power: the Deathworlders' complete indifference to any kind of mercy. They took no prisoners. Their enemy's ships were obliterated without hesitation, and the ground forces had no qualms about wiping out every living thing that stood in their way. The strategy was simple: annihilate, overrun, and move on. The Council had expected a brutal fight, but they hadn't expected this level of efficiency, this level of savagery. Back in the Council chambers, the representatives were in turmoil. The horror unfolding on the battlefield was unimaginable. "This is not war," the Norexian representative muttered, his hands shaking. "This is an execution." The Aldronian ambassador could barely bring himself to speak. He had once been proud of the strategies his people had created, complex and diplomatic maneuvers that involved negotiation and leverage. But the Deathworlders had rendered all of that obsolete. There was no negotiation with them. There were no compromises. The members of the Galactic Council had wanted help. They had wanted to fight back against a common enemy. But in accepting the Deathworlders' aid, they had invited a storm that would leave nothing untouched. There was no turning back now. "We've made a dangerous alliance," the Aldronian whispered, "and I fear the consequences of what we've set in motion." The tides of war turn. As the Deathworlders continued their relentless assault, the galactic forces tried to regroup. But every time they attempted to mount a counteroffensive, they were met with overwhelming force. The Deathworlders seemed to know their every move before they made it. It was as if they were always one step ahead, anticipating the strategies of their enemies before they even had a chance to deploy them. In the Galactic Council chambers, the tension was palpable. The Council had originally hoped the Deathworlders would be a formidable ally, but now they realized they had unleashed a force they couldn't control. The once proud representatives were shaken, their faces a mix of disbelief and fear. "Why are they doing this?" the Trellian representative asked in a trembling voice, pacing back and forth. "Why are they so brutal?" "Their culture is built around survival," the Norexian ambassador replied grimly. "They've survived on worlds where only the strongest can thrive. Mercy doesn't exist for them. It's not part of their nature." The question still lingered in the air. Had they made a mistake by calling on the Deathworlders in the first place? The answer seemed clear now. It was no longer about rescuing the galaxy from the enemy threat. It was about surviving the fury the Deathworlders had unleashed. Meanwhile, the Deathworlders were systematically dismantling the opposition. They didn't waste time with small skirmishes. They attacked with precision, striking the heart of the enemy's strongholds. The Council's fleets were scattered and broken, their communications severed. The battlefield was littered with the remains of ships that had been obliterated in a single strike. On the ground, the Deathworlder forces were no less merciless. Their soldiers, rugged, fearless, and efficient, swept across planets, wiping out enemy defenses with ease. The once formidable alien forces were no match for the raw power and unmatched tactics of the Deathworlders. It wasn't just about defeating them. It was about sending a message. Resistance was futile. Despite the chaos, there was an eerie calm among the Deathworlders. They didn't celebrate victory or show any sign of hesitation. It was as though they had always expected to win, and this was just another part of the mission. The speed with which they conquered and moved on left no time for emotion or reflection. For them, war was simply another task to be completed. Back on the Council, the representatives began to question their own judgment. The War Council had sent envoys to the Deathworlder fleet, hoping for advice and guidance, but they had underestimated what would come with it. They had underestimated the level of brutality they would face. "We need to stop them," the Trellian representative pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is getting out of control." "We can't stop them," the Norexian replied coldly, eyes downcast. "Not now. They've already made their move, and the galaxy is at their mercy. Our only option now is to try to contain the damage." But no one had an answer for how to contain the Deathworlders. Every attempt to fight back had failed. The idea of negotiating with them seemed laughable now. They hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to dominate. The Deathworlders' reputation was already spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. Stories of their devastating attacks, their ruthless strategies, and their impenetrable forces were being whispered across every corner of the galaxy. Some began to fear that the Deathworlders might turn on their supposed allies. If they were willing to destroy enemies so thoroughly, would anyone be safe from their wrath? On the battlefield, a lone Deathworlder general surveyed the wreckage left in their wake. His eyes were cold, calculating. He knew the galaxy was reeling, struggling to comprehend the force of destruction they had just unleashed. But for him, there was no time for sentiment. There was only the mission. There was only victory. The galaxy would soon know that the Deathworlders were not to be trifled with. As the Galactic Council scrambled to piece together what was left of their forces, they were forced to come to a terrifying realization. They had created an unstoppable force, a force that could reshape the galaxy in its image. But at what cost? The collapse of hope. The Deathworlder forces were relentless. Their war tactics, honed over millennia of brutal survival on hostile planets, proved to be far more efficient than anyone had anticipated. The Galactic Council was left in a state of complete disarray. Once proud and united, they now appeared weak, divided, and fearful. In every corner of the galaxy, planetary governments were crumbling beneath the weight of the Deathworlders' might. Systems that had once been thriving centers of power were now reduced to smoldering ruins. Alien fleets, once considered invincible, had been torn apart with ease. The Deathworlders' signature tactics, swift, brutal, and unforgiving, left nothing but devastation in their wake. The news of these victories spread like wildfire. Whole star systems had fallen before the Deathworlders even had time to break a sweat. No longer were the Council's warships able to defend their planets. Every battle was a victory for the Deathworlders. Every defeat, a heavy blow to the once glorious alliance of the galaxy. In a high-security council chamber, the leaders gathered in an emergency meeting, their faces pale and their voices strained. The once confident diplomats and military commanders were now shadows of their former selves. Desperation had set in. Their once strong alliance had been fractured, and their greatest hope now seemed like a distant dream. "We must understand them," the Alar ambassador muttered, struggling to hold back tears. "We can't just fight them. We need to find a way to stop them." But how? The Hessian general spat, his face twisted with frustration. "We've tried everything. Diplomacy is useless. Negotiation is pointless. They're not interested in peace. They want submission." A cold silence filled the room. The council members exchanged glances, unsure of what to say next. How had they gone from allies to enemies so quickly? How had they misjudged the nature of the Deathworlders so badly? What started as a partnership to protect the galaxy from an external threat had turned into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. "It's over," said a voice in the back of the room. It was the Tigor representative, whose species had been decimated in a matter of hours. "There's no stopping them. We have no way to fight back." The other council members stared at him, their eyes wide with disbelief. How could they have come to this point? Had they truly underestimated the Deathworlders to this extent? The reality of the situation began to set in. The Deathworlders had not come for mere conquest. They had come to show their dominance. They were not interested in negotiation, nor were they concerned with alliances. The Deathworlders had already won. It was only a matter of time before the entire galaxy bent to their will. Desperation filled the council chambers as the representatives tried to come up with any plan, any solution to the situation. But there was no plan. There was no way out. Every idea they threw at the wall seemed hopeless. Nothing more than empty words in the face of overwhelming power. "We need to stop them," the Trellian representative pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is getting out of control." "We can't stop them," the Norexian replied coldly, eyes downcast. "Not now. They've already made their move, and the galaxy is at their mercy. Our only option now is to try to contain the damage." But no one had an answer for how to contain the Deathworlders. Every attempt to fight back had failed. The idea of negotiating with them seemed laughable now. They hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to dominate. The Deathworlders' reputation was already spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. Stories of their devastating attacks, their ruthless strategies, and their impenetrable forces were being whispered across every corner of the galaxy. Some began to fear that the Deathworlders might turn on their supposed allies. If they were willing to destroy enemies so thoroughly, would anyone be safe from their wrath? On the battlefield, a lone Deathworlder general surveyed the wreckage left in their wake. His eyes were cold, calculating. He knew the galaxy was reeling, struggling to comprehend the force of destruction they had just unleashed. But for him, there was no time for sentiment. There was only the mission. There was only victory. The galaxy would soon know that the Deathworlders were not to be trifled with. As the Galactic Council scrambled to piece together what was left of their forces, they were forced to come to a terrifying realization. They had created an unstoppable force, a force that could reshape the galaxy in its image. But at what cost? The collapse of hope. The Deathworlder forces were relentless. Their war tactics, honed over millennia of brutal survival on hostile planets, proved to be far more efficient than anyone had anticipated. The Galactic Council was left in a state of complete disarray. Once proud and united, they now appeared weak, divided, and fearful. In every corner of the galaxy, planetary governments were crumbling beneath the weight of the Deathworlders' might. Systems that had once been thriving centers of power were now reduced to smoldering ruins. Alien fleets, once considered invincible, had been torn apart with ease. The Deathworlders' signature tactics, swift, brutal, and unforgiving, left nothing but devastation in their wake. The news of these victories spread like wildfire. Whole star systems had fallen before the Deathworlders even had time to break a sweat. No longer were the Council's warships able to defend their planets. Every battle was a victory for the Deathworlders, every defeat a heavy blow to the once glorious alliance of the galaxy. In a high-security council chamber, the leaders gathered in an emergency meeting, their faces pale and their voices strained. The once confident diplomats and military commanders were now shadows of their former selves. Desperation had set in. Their once strong alliance had been fractured, and their greatest hope now seemed like a distant dream. "We must understand them," the Alar ambassador muttered, struggling to hold back tears. "We can't just fight them. We need to find a way to stop them." But how? The Hessian general spat, his face twisted with frustration. "We've tried everything. Diplomacy is useless. Negotiation is pointless. They're not interested in peace. They'd want submission." A cold silence filled the room. The council members exchanged glances, unsure of what to say next. How had they gone from allies to enemies so quickly? How had they misjudged the nature of the Deathworlders so badly? What started as a partnership to protect the galaxy from an external threat had turned into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. "It's over," said a voice in the back of the room. It was the Tigor representative, whose species had been decimated in a matter of hours. "There's no stopping them. We have no way to fight back." The other council members stared at him, their eyes wide with disbelief. How could they have come to this point? Had they truly underestimated the Deathworlders to this extent? The reality of the situation began to set in. The Deathworlders had not come for mere conquest. They had come to show their dominance. They were not interested in negotiation, nor were they concerned with alliances. The Deathworlders had already won. It was only a matter of time before the entire galaxy bent to their will. Desperation filled the council chambers as the representatives tried to come up with any plan, any solution to the situation. But there was no plan. There was no way out. Every idea they threw at the wall seemed hopeless, nothing more than empty words in the face of overwhelming power. Meanwhile, the Deathworlder forces continued their warpath, unimpeded by the Council's futile attempts at diplomacy. Their tactics had left entire fleets shattered, their supply lines severed, and their defenses all but destroyed. The Deathworlders were everywhere, and there was no safe haven. Back on the front lines, the Deathworlder generals showed no mercy. They were not fighters in the traditional sense. They were predators, honed by years of struggle and survival. Every soldier under their command was a weapon, each one trained to be the last thing an enemy saw before their world crumbled. On one war-torn planet, a young officer in the Galactic fleet looked up at the sky. He could hear the rumble of battle in the distance. His crew was scattered, their forces broken. The Deathworlders had already reached the capital, and there was nothing left for them to do but try to survive. As he looked out over the desolate landscape, he realized something that had been gnawing at him for days. There would be no more rescue, no more relief, no more hope. The Deathworlders had taken it all. They had taken everything. Across the galaxy, the remaining forces of the Galactic Council faced the same grim reality. The Deathworlders were not just conquerors, they were extinction itself, and there was no place to hide. In a dark corner of space, deep in the heart of the Deathworlder fleet, the leaders sat in silence. There were no cheers, no celebrations. The victory was not about triumph. It was about the cold, relentless execution of a mission. The galaxy would learn that the Deathworlders were not to be challenged. Their dominance was absolute, and nothing at all, could change that now. The Council had failed. The galaxy had failed. The Deathworlders had won. The Deathworlder response. The final strike was now imminent. The fleet, small but determined, had been meticulously planned. Commander Uran stood on the command deck, his eyes scanning the tactical map displayed before him. His heart beat faster with each passing moment, knowing that they were about to face the most powerful forces the galaxy had ever seen. "All systems are go," one of the officers reported, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We're ready for launch, Commander." Uran nodded, though the weight of the mission pressed heavily on his shoulders. This was it, the last hope of the galaxy. Their odds were slim, but they had to try. He turned toward his team, his voice low but firm. "Remember, this is not just a military operation. It's our survival. We may not win, but we will fight with everything we have." As the fleet prepared to jump into hyperspace, a sense of grim resolve settled over the crew. Each of them knew what this mission meant, and the risks were clear. Death was almost certain, but they were going to make the Deathworlders feel the sting of their defiance. The ship sped through the vast emptiness of space, heading toward the heart of Deathworlder-controlled territory. The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly. Inside the Council's new command center, back on the outer rim, the remaining leaders of the Galactic Council watched anxiously, praying for the strike to succeed. But as the fleet approached its target, they were met with a shocking revelation. A small scouting fleet had already discovered their approach. Their plans had been compromised. On the command deck, alarms began to blare. "Incoming Deathworlder fleet detected," one of the officers shouted. The tactical display flashed red as the enemy ships closed in. They were prepared, far more than Uran had anticipated. The Deathworlders had known they were coming. Full evasive maneuvers. Uran barked, his voice a mix of urgency and authority. "Prepare to engage." But even as the fleet moved to defend itself, the Deathworlder ships opened fire. Their weapons were as brutal as ever, each blast causing a shudder throughout the fleet. The Deathworlders had no intention of letting this small band of resistance escape. The battle was upon them. But Uran had one final card to play. He knew the Deathworlders' strength, how they relied on overwhelming force. But he also knew their weakness. They expected to crush them in a conventional fight. And that was exactly what Uran intended to avoid. "All ships, move into Formation Delta, create a diversion, and use the asteroid field for cover," Uran ordered. "We'll draw them in, then hit them where it hurts." The fleet broke into smaller groups, scattering into the nearby asteroid field. The Deathworlders followed with relentless aggression, but as they entered the dense field of asteroids, their firepower became less effective. The once dominant force was now forced to play a defensive game, their attacks hindered by the obstacles around them. It was a risky maneuver. One wrong move, and they would be sitting ducks. But the Deathworlders were not invincible, and Uran knew that. With every passing moment, the fleet's small ships began launching surprise attacks, using the field to their advantage, forcing the Deathworlders to spread their fire across multiple targets. The battle was chaotic. Explosions rang out as ships dodged and weaved through the floating rocks, each of them barely escaping the Deathworlder's deadly aim. But the guerrilla tactics, unpredictable and wild, were working. The Deathworlder's overwhelming force was slowly being chipped away, their perfect formation disrupted. Inside the Deathworlder flagship, General Kell watched the battle unfold on the command screens. His face twisted into a snarl as he realized what was happening. These weren't the typical forces they had encountered before. These were not just the last remnants of a defeated galaxy. They were fighters, resourceful and cunning. And they were making a fool of him. "Increase firepower," General Kell growled. "Crush them before they cause any more damage." But the Galactic fleet wasn't done yet. They had one final trick, a last desperate measure. They had lured the Deathworlders into a trap that would buy them just enough time for the remaining ships to strike a blow. It wasn't much, but it was enough to prove a point. As the Deathworlders moved in to finish off the fleet, they were met with a surprise. A secondary fleet, hidden just outside their line of sight, emerged from the other side of the asteroid field. It was the remaining ships of the Galactic Council, the last remnants of a fallen empire. With a devastating barrage of fire, they unleashed their full force on the unsuspecting Deathworlders. Caught between two forces, the Deathworlders found themselves in a deadly crossfire. Their once unmatched strength faltered as their ships began to fall, one after another. The tide of battle had turned. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a message. The Deathworlders may have been the most powerful force in the galaxy, but they were not invincible. The Galactic Council had struck back with fury and strategy, and in that moment, the Deathworlders realized something that they had never considered. The galaxy was not theirs to conquer. At least, not yet. Conclusion: the galaxy had learned a painful yet powerful truth. The Deathworlders were strong, yes, but they could be outsmarted. They could be defeated, if only for a time. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, hope returned. The battle for the future of the galaxy would continue, but the Deathworlders' seemingly unstoppable advance had been delayed. And as the Galactic fleet regrouped, Commander Uran stood tall, watching the stars. The war was not over, but the Deathworlders had seen the strength of those they had underestimated. And now, there was no going back.